It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio.
Hello, welcome to RealAg Radio. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith. It is Friday, August 25th. It is the week of the ProFarmer Tour. And yes, as promised, I've been promising it all week. We've got Brian Grete, who's going to join us on the show, who's going to talk about those ProFarmer Tour numbers, corn, soy. So excited, can't wait. Also, it is Friday. We have an issues panel. Andrew Campbell from Strathroy, Ontario, and Kelvin Heppner from Altona, Manitoba, and of course, RealAgriculture, are going to join me for 3 segments today. So absolutely stick around for that. If you have feedback on today's show, call that feedback line 1-855-776-6147 or zip me an email, lsmith@realagriculture.com. All right, I'm going to be here next week as well. So loving the feedback. Keep it coming. Find us on social media as well at RealAgriculture. All right, settle in. It's time to hear more on this corn crop, the soy crop with those ProFarmer numbers with Brian Grete right after this.
Boron is an essential micronutrient for plant growth, and without boron, your crops can't absorb the macronutrients they need for higher yields. Although borates occur naturally, boron deficiency is a common soil problem. Whether in direct soil application, through fertigation, or as a foliar spray, US Borax has the right refined product for your crops. US Borax products are specifically formulated to combine with other fertilizers, lowering your application costs. Learn more at borax.com/ag.
At the 2023 Canadian Beef Industry Conference, RealAg Radio did a live broadcast in front of the audience, and we focused on managing your farm business through adversity. We're talking right now to Todd Miller. He is CEO of Tech Canada. Todd, I want to hit on decision making. What are some suggestions you have in terms of making good decisions during very stressful times?
The pre-existing solution to all problems lies within the questions you ask. So in essence, if you can find yourself in a room with like-minded individuals, regardless of industry, the process to follow is to really say, how do I do this? And state that very, very clearly. Give a little bit of background and state why it's important. Make sure that everyone has a vested interest in as to what you're trying to accomplish and start probing each other and really asking really deep questions, and all of a sudden, an answer prevails. The pre-existing solution to all problems lies within the questions you ask.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on this Friday. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and this segment is brought to you by Granubor from US Borax. Ask for it by name. Joining me now from a car somewhere in Iowa, it's Brian Grete. He's the editor of ProFarmer and lead of the eastern leg of the ProFarmer Tour. Brian, how are you?
Oh, I'm great, Lyndsey. Thank you.
Yeah, all right. Running on caffeine, that's for sure. All right, so this week was the ProFarmer Tour. In a word, how did it go?
Hot. It was hot for most of the week. Extreme heat down here, and but it went well.
Good. Now, for those who may not be aware, which I suppose you have to be living under a rock not to know what it's all about, but what is the ProFarmer Tour all about?
It's about finding out what the yield potential is for corn and soybeans in the third full week of August. And so we traverse from Ohio in the eastern Corn Belt to South Dakota, southeast South Dakota, and central Nebraska in the western Corn Belt, encompassing 7 states in 4 days and collecting samples. At the end of the week, we ended up with almost 1,800 corn samples and 1,800 soybean samples. And so just a tremendous job by our scouts again this year.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, how many people are involved on this tour?
So we have about 100 scouts split almost evenly between the east and the west. that go for the full week, but we also have participants that join us for a day, two, or whatever the case may be. So in total, we probably have, scouting-wise, about 120 people that actively participated throughout the week in those 4 days.
All right. Now, so if you followed along, if any of you did, on the crop tour across social media, you got to see some of those samples that were pulled. You got to see some of the conditions. People would weigh in. Was this better or worse? Those sorts of things. But, of course, ProFarmer takes all that in, adds in all sorts of other factors and comes out with your estimate. Where are we at, drum roll please, on corn and soy?
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. So the U.S. corn and soybean estimates from ProFarmer, 14.960 billion bushels for corn with a yield of 172 bushels per acre. We put a plus or minus 1% factor on that, and so that would be production of 14.810 billion bushels up to 15.110 billion bushels. And on the yield side, it would be 170.3 bushels per acre up to 173.7 bushels per acre. We did adjust harvested acres up for corn based on FSA certified acreage data as of August. So we added 675,000 acres to corn above what was estimated in August.
Now, how does that fall in line with sort of where we were at before this tour?
So USDA's August estimate came in at 15.111 billion bushels. So basically the top end of our 1% range would be almost right at it. And so the yield reduction would be mostly offset by the increase in acres. If we get to that plus 1% range, there would be a reduction in production if we were at the midpoint of our range, which is our actual estimate.
So let's tackle the soybean numbers in just a second, because I just want to follow up with one of the things we definitely saw on this tour was, as you mentioned, that hot weather, that heat. We saw wilting, we saw dropped cobs, we saw also hats off to everybody on this tour because you guys looked very sweaty. How does that play into this number as far as production? I mean, I've certainly heard, people voicing some concern over whether or not all of those bushels make it to the bin.
Yeah, so definitely a factor, and one of the bigger factors this year was that the heat really had an impact. So I'm from Northeast Iowa, and when I left last Saturday to go to Crop Tour to make my way out to Ohio, things looked pretty good in most cases. We've had an up and down year here, and so there's variability within the fields. But boy, when I came back through yesterday, 5 days later, a stark difference. I couldn't believe it. Just the heat, the extreme heat for multiple days, really kicked this crop in the teeth, and ears are hanging already in the third week of August in some of these fields, and in many of the fields in Northeast Iowa in particular, and in East Central Iowa. And it really did have an impact. The western leg of the tour, I didn't see any of those samples, obviously, because I was on the eastern side. But obviously, I talked to the scouts and to Chip Flory, who runs that leg, and our conversation centered around just the extreme impact over there. And they had much more heat than what we did out in the eastern belt. We ran into it the final 2 days of our tour, but the first 2 days out there were pleasant. Not the case here. Very unpleasant in the western side.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. All right. So we'll keep tabs on how long, I suppose, this goes on for. On to the soybean number. Where are we at there?
Okay, so the national production estimate is 4.110 billion bushels on a yield of 49.7 bushels per acre. We put a plus or minus 2% on soybeans because it's really difficult to peg the soybean crop in the third week of August. Finish is incredibly important to soybeans, even more so than corn, because corn's done a lot of its building already at this stage, where soybeans still have to fill out, and that's dependent on late season weather. So that plus or minus 2% would put production anywhere from 4.028 billion bushels up to 4.192 billion bushels, and the yield would range from 48.7 bushels per acre to 50.7 bushels per acre. Down from USDA's August estimates, and the soybean crop, a lot of fields are already starting to turn here in the third week of August. So that's not common down here in the Corn Belt, the weather had an impact, and we're just concerned that the finish won't be strong on soybeans this year, and we will go backwards into the harvest season.
Mm-hmm. Now, and what was the USDA number? Remind me.
I'm drawing a blank on the USDA number off the top of my head, but it was above us. So we're down from USDA and down a fair amount there. Even the top end of that range is down from USDA.
Yeah, I am also drawing a blank. I want to say 52-ish, like close to that, or somewhere in that neighborhood, which, as you say, that would still be, your top end estimate is still well below that. So, yeah, and it is true, soybeans. I do, my hat goes off to you that you even try to put this number on soybeans at this point, because it is just so variable, this next month, what will happen. But as you said, certainly seeing the impact of some of this very hot weather on that crop as well. So absolutely fascinating. Brian, thanks so much for taking time. I know it's been a long week. I hope you get some rest in your own bed and some strong coffee in the morning to see you through the weekend.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lyndsey.
All right, we'll be back with more RealAg Radio right after this.
Introducing the all-new Xerion 12 Series tractor by Kloss. Redesigned from the ground up to redefine the high-capacity four-wheel drive market. With 653 max horsepower, industry-leading hydraulic flow, a silky smooth CVT, a powerful TerraTrack undercarriage, and a quiet, comfortable cab with 20% more legroom. More than just power. The all-new Introducing the Arion 600 Series tractor by Kloss, where versatility meets productivity head-on, because you've got jobs to do. Mowing, tedding, raking, baling, loading, filling, tilling, cleaning, spreading, hauling, feeding. This is multi-purpose reimagined to do the work for you. It's more than just power. The Arion 600 tractor gets it done.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on this Friday. This segment is brought to you by Savita. Calling all Ontario soybean growers, Savita International invites you to join their Titans of Agronomy events featuring an array of industry experts, including Peter Johnson, Albert Tenuta, Horst Bonner, Greg Stewart, and me, Lyndsey Smith. Also, commodity expert Bailey Elkinger. And I am not for a moment considering myself a Titan of Agronomy. I'm just going to be moderating the panel. All right, join that group in Woodstock next week, August 31st, or you can join me in Inkerman on September 7th. Pre-register at savita.com/events for the Titans of Agronomy. We'll see you there. All right, it's time to bring in the issues panel. I have with me Andrew Campbell, farmer extraordinaire, Fresh Air Farmer. How are you?
I'm wonderful, Lyndsey. How are you?
Well, you know what? I'm well, but I feel like maybe you're not wonderful. And we're going to talk about why in a moment, in that it's been a pretty wild couple days of weather. So we'll get to that in just a second. I'm going to bring in our second panelist, Kelvin Heppner out of Altona, Manitoba. Hi.
Hello, Lyndsey. Good to be here. Looking forward to our discussion today.
Yeah, I am super excited. I get to run the issues panel, and this is pretty exciting. Okay, so Andrew, I did allude to it, but if anybody was keeping an eye on the weather, southwestern Ontario got pummeled this week with rain. Some areas seeing 6 inches of water in less than 24 hours. How did your farm fare?
Yeah, so we were 5.5, so not quite 6. The high that I've heard is 7.5.
Oh my gosh.
Just of kind of a few miles west of us. And yeah, it's damp, believe it or not, when you get that kind of rain, because most of it actually came within about a 3-hour window. It just kind of came down. So I think, for us, we actually are in great shape because we were able, where water was pooling and running through and all of that, wasn't the worst. I think the biggest challenges are actually in town from what I've seen, just because there's nothing worse than having, your nice basement flooded. And there are, I would guess the number is closing in on hundreds of basements have been flooded and getting ripped out and all of that kind of stuff, with some washed out roads and all that kind of stuff. So, that's where we are now. Crop damage wise, nobody really knows. It's still too early. That was only, a day or two ago. So I think the big thing is let's get the water out. Let's hope it doesn't rain. The forecast is much better for the weekend. And then next week we can kind of take a toll on just what kind of damage, beyond structures we're dealing with around here.
Where are you at with haying, Andrew?
We're actually in between. So we're really fortunate that we kind of baled up some, kind of grass horse type hay just the day before. And so, we're good that way with, another cut knot, for another probably 10 days to 2 weeks. So we're good that way. But yeah, it's been challenging to make hay. I know that, Lyndsey, too, around here. So, it's one of those where, yeah, everybody's fighting with it. There's a lot of hay that is wet and wrapped and that, just to get some kind of quality to it. So, but I think the big thing right now is just, as I say, just fix the damage that might be there, and then, worry about everything else next week.
We saw, the 402 was closed further south of you. There was, tons of overland flooding, which is pretty scary. But as you mentioned, then we think about crop damage too as well, or even just the longer term, issues of having a very wet season. I know that, I've heard rumblings of the gibberella threat in corn. Hopefully we'll fare better than 2018, but this is sort of a similar kind of setup. And then, beans love moisture, so hey, that's fine, except for that we've also got a lot of white mold happening and some root rots happening. Edible beans, I've been told, don't look great. So yeah, and maybe I'm underestimating that just slightly. So it really does. It feels a bit odd when you're also seeing things like all these wildfires out west and the incredible drought in the middle in Saskatchewan and parts of Alberta as well. Kelvin, just quickly, you're actually getting rain as well, are you not?
We've had a couple showers over the last week that are holding up harvest. It's not that we've accumulated anything close to that. When I hear 7 inches, that's like 3 times as much rain as parts of Western Canada have had. More than 3 times as much rain. It's what parts of Western Canada are growing a crop on this year. So, but yeah, it's of course a very different situation. And yeah, we're kind of waiting. We've had a lot of cool, foggy mornings that have slowed down crop maturation here right at the tail end. So our wheat has been sitting, I'd say, 2-3 sunny days away from harvest for 2 weeks now.
So it's that the nicer weather is the 14-day forecast phenomenon.
Yeah,
where
exactly.
It's 2 more days. No, 2 more days. No, 2 more days. Yeah, it always, I know. If everything could just sort itself out for a week, we'd all be a lot happier, and much less stressed. Let's put it that way. Okay. I do want to stick with sort of harvest and the weather for just a little bit. Kelvin, you joined me on Tuesday's show. We talked about agri recovery sort of moving forward for Saskatchewan and Alberta. This is the disaster relief program. Do we have any new details, any more details yet? Or are we still in the, hey, they're figuring stuff out
We're
phase?
still in the, hey, they're figuring stuff out, negotiating between the federal and provincial governments on what these programs are going to look like. It does sound like middle of September is the target date by when they're hoping to be able to roll these out. That would require, we talked about this on Tuesday, the Prime Minister and Finance Minister's offices need to sign off on this dollar amount if the federal government's going to roll out this agri-recovery program. It's on a 64-day cost share with the provinces. Saskatchewan this week announced their portion, and that's where Alberta hasn't announced, but they are also talking about drawing up the criteria for this and that it could look similar to the 2021 drought agri-recovery programming that was offered. So, yeah, we don't have a lot of details, but there was that signal made by provincial and federal governments this week basically sending this message out that we are going to move ahead with ag recovery. So factor that into your decisions on whether or not to keep your breeding herds and where you're at with feed supplies and that type of thing. We don't know the dollar amount, although Saskatchewan has announced that provincially they're aiming to provide $80 per head. So if we do the math on that, 40% of a 60-40 cost share, it could probably look similar to what we saw in 2021, the drought 2 years ago, in the programs that were offered in Saskatchewan and Alberta.
So, Andrew, I want to ask you, $80 to feed and keep a cow over the winter. Now, I know it's dairy, not beef, but
that's just 40%.
How far does
Lyndsey.
80 go?
80 is just 40%. So I'm assuming it's going to end up being something like $200.
Right. Okay, but how far does 80 go first?
Well, you know what? It actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because when I was flipping through the news and saw that article, like, my first instinct was $80 for a season, right. and I do, and you're right, Kelvin. Even if it is 40%, okay, we get to 200. That's, the challenge in these drought situations you run into is that $200, may buy a bit of feed in, a good year. But when it's dry and it's got to get trucked in and it's scarce to begin with, like, gosh, to me, that does not sound like it would go very far.
So I did a bit of digging on what hay is going for out west right now, and there are areas where that $200 would not buy you more than a bale and a half.
Yeah, and it's probably still climbing quickly right now.
Right, and it's still climbing.
There's people going. We have other farms around. We're not in the heart of the drought zone. We're in a dry area, but not in the heart of drought-stricken and high cattle number Saskatchewan, Alberta. But there's people going door to door here looking for straw that they can bale. Like the urgency has definitely ramped up. I think you can feel it over just the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, and that's, I'll agree there too, right? Like, we're seeing definitely more of because I think, earlier in the season, it's always like, well, if we get rain by next week, or if we get rain by the week after, if we get, right? But we are at now, it is crunch time, right? It is, what do you have for feed? What do you have for, money to buy in feed? What feed is out there on the landscape, to your point, Andrew, if you can even find it, and what's it going to cost to truck it? We know that, Kelvin, to your point, yes, this is, we're waiting to see what the final number will be. We don't know yet if there will be a freight subsidy. I know that has come into play before, where there may be an incentive to move livestock to feed as opposed to feed to livestock. So we're going through that. But realistically, I mean, and I don't think anyone expects that, a recovery program is going to completely pay all your bills by any stretch. But realistically, $200 a head, and it's only on breeding livestock. So this is an important point. And I talked to Tara Davidson out of Pontiac, Saskatchewan, and Andrew, this might make you barf. They budget, because they have in February, March, because they have purebreds. She budgets right now, it will cost her $90 just in straw for, like, per cow. But, bringing up the point that if you background cattle take 18 to 24 months, before they go to town, they're not considered breeding livestock. So what's the support? And so it's a really complicated thing. And what really gets me, and what I think, many people are talking about now is this where agri-stability should have kicked in? But most ranchers will tell you that that program doesn't really work on the livestock side as well. So it really does beg the question, this is how many years of drought out of the last 5? Should we be doing something larger scale to perhaps add in some resiliency for our farmers and our ranchers out there on feed supplies? So we're not going to solve it today. I'm just saying that, oh my goodness, there's some problems. Okay, you know what? We better, now that I've just decided that the issues panel is me talking. Thanks, guys. I appreciate that.
You're making a good point.
Job, Lyndsey.
Yeah, keep it going.
No, I'm supposed to host. No, let's take a quick break. We'll come back with more of the RealAg Issues panel right after this.
Did you know that Pioneer now has a full lineup of Enlist E3 soybeans? Take a look at Pioneer brand Enlist E3 soybeans for the highest yield potential and for the best agronomic package and herbicide trait options. From the lab to the field, Pioneer brand Enlist E3 soybeans are the best in beans, period. Ask your local Pioneer representative about Enlist E3 beans.
When it comes to the productivity and efficiency of your operation, every decision counts. One of those decisions is how you fuel your equipment. You need to be sure that it will run efficiently and without unnecessary downtime. Count on Co-op and your local Co-op fuel team to keep your equipment running smoothly with seasonally blended high-quality fuels and premium lubricants with guaranteed performance. We are Western Canadian. We are fueling harvest. We are Co-op.
Does your N stabilizer contain an active ingredient load high enough to be agronomically effective? If not, it could be costing you time and money. If you're putting down a nitrogen stabilizer, put your trust in Koch Agronomic Services. Solutions like Super U, Tribune, and Anvil. Each delivers high active ingredient concentrations that low-rate products just can't match. Compare how imitator products stack up to agronomically effective solutions at defendyourn.ca.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and this segment is brought to you by New Farm and their pre-emergent soil-active herbicides Valterra, EZ, and Fierce EZ from New Farm. Get ahead of hard-to-kill weeds. Spray this fall for up to 8 weeks of extended weed control next spring. Find out more about New Farm products at newfarm.ca. All right, we have the RealAg Issues Panel. We have Andrew Campbell and Mr. Kelvin Heppner. And we are solving all the world's problems today. So let's start with, should Justin Trudeau run as the leader of the Liberals next election? Andrew, I'll start with you.
Well, I'd say should and will are probably two different conversations to have in this. I think the reality is clearly the way I see, all the parties kind of working at this is we're headed towards an election probably sooner than any of us are really thrilled about. It's not that far away, and I think probably if he was going to step down, that ship's probably sailed for how quickly I think this election might roll in come, early next year. But you're right. When you look at some of the numbers that are out there in terms of, what Canadians definitely feel, it's not really surprising. We get into these kind of, economically challenging times where people are having a tough time paying bills, and, the finger gradually starts pointing to the government. And if you're the face of that and have branded yourself as we are the ones that are here to solve all your problems, and you're not, I think it's probably one of those situations that there's no real winning scenario for him in terms of just his popularity. So it's one where, we probably should just what the numbers say, but I don't think we're going to see that just based on election timing.
Mm-hmm. So Abacus data did come out with some numbers around this. Kelvin, 27% of people don't think Justin Trudeau should run again.
Sorry, it was the other way around. It was 27% said Trudeau should stay.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry. Should stay.
56% said
he should go.
He should step down. 17% said they weren't sure. So only just over a quarter said he should stay, and that in line with what Andrew's saying, that's not really surprising. The only thing is, from a Liberal Party perspective, who else would run? Who else would be the leader that would have a better fate in a federal election between now and October 2025, when the mandatory election date is set? It has to be before then. So, I don't think that he is going to be stepping down. I do think that Justin Trudeau will be leading the Liberal Party into the next federal election, but certainly doesn't have strong support. And the gap between the Conservatives and the Liberals continues to grow. This new Abacus data out today showing a 12% lead now for the Conservatives, up versus 10 or 11% earlier this month or last month. And so trending in the wrong direction. They haven't hit a bottom yet in terms of support federally. And David Coletto and the team at Abacus also saw that Pierre Poilievre's popularity is increasing. 34% of respondents said they have a positive impression of the Conservative leader, up 4 points from just a few weeks ago. And so there has been an effort by the Conservative brain trust to soften up his image. And I know there's a new campaign, a commercial this week that I was talking about with Sean in chat. While he's on holidays, yes, we still talk politics every now and then. But there's an ad where Poilievre talks about Canadians aren't angry, Canadians are hurting. And he talks about shaking all the hands at one of his rallies, and he looks into the people's eyes, and they're hurting. They're not angry, they're hurting. And that type of tone wins Pierre Poilievre the next federal election, I think.
So, well, and he also got rid of the glasses. And there's also a more family bent to a lot of the advertising that's going out there as well. So I see here, you know, where we've got, you know, his wife and his kids are being sort of showcased. Like the conservative machine is definitely, I think, listening to where people maybe haven't connected with Pierre Poilievre, and they're trying to bring in and show, you know, here's the things that you maybe didn't know about him, or here's, you know, these things matter to him too. And so they're listening, I think, in that. I think that has a pretty significant impact on, and exactly that point. I think that, yes, there are angry people out there. Often, though, people get angry because they feel that they can't change where they're at, or they feel like things are stacking up against them. And that is hurting. That is financially not being able, or, you know, to maybe pay for your groceries, or know how you're going to pay for next week's groceries. I mean, and this is the reality that a lot of people are facing. So I see it for sure. I was just going to say quickly, both you, Andrew, and Lyndsey, you're both in Ontario, and longtime liberal strategist, pollster David Hurley on his podcast lately referenced how he sees a lot of similarities between the Trudeau government right now and the last days of the Kathleen Wynne government in Ontario before the collapse, there was just a colossal collapse in support, and that when you saw the Doug Ford progressive conservative government come into power. So some similarities there, and interesting to hear a liberal strategist make that observation. Andrew, would you agree with that, do you think?
I probably wouldn't, actually, just because I think that, you know, when I saw the fall of, you know, the Kathleen Wynne government, I think there was this mentality more of like a mismanagement and misspending and no matter what they did, because I don't think it was necessarily terrible economic times that did that people were feeling that they were being left out. It was much more that you don't know what you're doing. Whereas I think this one's a little harsher, and I think not a little less harsh, which is why I'm not completely convinced that the city of Toronto changes who they vote for yet. I don't know if we're quite there yet. You know, but I think that the longer this goes, and that's really where the Liberals are going to have to decide. You know, they're going to have to start to decide to say, okay, are we going to do an election in the near term? Or do you, as you said, you know, Kelvin, in terms of, you know, 2025, do you wait and hope things get better then? You know, that's a long time to wait and a long time to hope. So they're going to have to start to hedge their bets pretty soon.
2025 isn't a long enough runway to fix a housing crisis.
And I would agree with that. And I think all of the other things, like, you know, just interest rates and mortgages, and like 2025 sounds like a long ways away, but it really is not. Really not. Yeah. And I think especially in terms of just raw emotion that people feel, you know, doesn't seem to be a long way. So one of these days, I think that they could very well get to those Kathleen Wynne days if you wait too long. I just don't personally see quite that much. Like, gosh, there was so much anger over the Ontario Liberals back then that anybody else could have walked in and taken that election. You know, because there was just so much. I just don't see us there yet, but we could very easily get there.
I think, yeah. So Kelvin, I would echo that from Andrew's point. I don't know if it's yet, but given, you're right, when we think about 2025, like, that is a long ways away, but it's also not. And realistically, this next 12 months, I don't foresee things getting better for the Liberals, in which case, by the time we get to an election, do we see a colossal collapse? Maybe. So that I'll definitely say we could get there. Absolutely. So then it becomes, from the Liberal side, do you call the election or do you not? And I don't think they do. Anyway, it also begs the question, and I don't know that we'll have time on it on today's show, but if Trudeau were to step down, who would take his place? And I guess that question, you could take it from before the next election or after. And I feel like some of the the leading candidates this next year may not be kind for them. So that might be an interesting one. Go ahead, Andrew.
Well, I'm quite curious because you've got a few names in there that I think would very much like to take over, but would you even want to right now? Like, let's be honest. Like, can you, do you think if you're, Chrystia Freeland's the name that always gets thrown out first of all the time. If you're her, is this the time you would want to take over, or do you let kind of the hatred, run through, and then when you actually might have a chance of winning an election and being a prime minister, that's when you take it? I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Or I think about like Anita Anand or someone like that, who right now is telling the government they need to find $15 billion in savings. Probably not going to be a very popular person a year from now, Kelvin.
No, exactly. And some think that may have been a strategic move by the current prime minister to fend off a challenge on the leadership. There's some of that type of strategy that could be happening here too. But yeah, I agree with Andrew's point completely. Who would want to be stepping into that leadership chair right now? And I guess all of these politicians have aspirations of being influential and that type of thing. So maybe they'll still run for it. But yeah, right now, going back to the first part of this discussion, 27% only saying that Trudeau should stay based on this Abacus data out today. I don't know who else would be a better fit to lead the Liberals into the next election, given or would fare better in the next election. Maybe they could turn something around quickly, but yeah, I don't see that being likely at this point.
All right. So while all of this very important political wrangling is happening at home, there are still things happening on the global scale. Kelvin, India is an incredibly important market to Canada, and perhaps will be more so going forward. Where are we at with trade visits and discussions?
Yeah, so the G20 meeting has been happening in India this week, and Canada's Trade Minister Mary Ng is in India. And apparently on the sidelines of the meeting, of the main G20 meeting, there was supposed to be a meeting between her and her Indian cabinet counterpart, looking at this trade deal that both governments, Canada and India, continue to send messages that they hope to complete this deal by the end of this year, which seems very unlikely. It is only called an early progress trade agreement, so real high level, but agriculture could certainly be a big part of this. When you look at what Canada and India trade back and forth, a lot of it is our agricultural exports from Western Canada, and so that is something to pay attention to, and it sounds like they're planning to meet today, I believe, Minister Ng with the industry minister from India, talking about that on the sidelines of the G20. So yeah, and meanwhile, India also working towards a UK European focus on trade deals this week, some announcements there. So India is certainly, everybody is looking to India as kind of the next China in some ways, and so Canada is in the same situation, and from an agricultural export industry focus, it seems like this should be a priority for the Canadian government.
Okay, so Andrew, you're a dairy farmer from Ontario. Do you really care about India's relationship with Canada? Be very honest.
Well, I think, my position on it would come more from kind of a macro agriculture, perspective, because I do think, just the size of that population and where Canadian agriculture is, certainly I think there's a place to do it. And the rifts that we've had with India over the last few years, wouldn't it be nice if we had, a few formalized mechanisms to maybe work through that? Not saying that always works every time, but I definitely think there is a place for that in terms of, yes, in terms of the impact on me, not even just as a dairy farmer, but, even an Ontario grain farmer, growing corn and soybeans. Is the impact big for me? No, it's probably, next to zero, but I know full well what kind of impact that can have, particularly in West Canada.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for being self-aware, Andrew. I really appreciate that.
Always happy to do that, because it is one of those, especially like I truly do believe that, you know, as we in, you know, Canadian agriculture kind of deal with these you know, all these changing global dynamics, you know, we need some diversity in our portfolio of countries we export to, you know, and the most populous country seems to be a good place to look.
I think I would agree with you there. And sorry, Kelvin, I was just going to go to a break and then come back to talk a bit more about that, but you go ahead quick.
Just going to say the India meeting, G20 meeting, also focused on, there was talk about WTO reform at this meeting. Speaking of trade irritants and issues over the years where our non-tariff trade barriers have been put in place, Canada relies on the WTO's dispute settlement process, which has been broken for a number of years now. We look at mandatory country of origin labeling as the prime example of where that tool was used. And that was another one of the topics that has been discussed in India this week, the need to reform the WTO.
And we'll see if it goes anywhere. All right, let's take a quick break and we'll be back with our last segment of the day. It is absolutely flying. All right, right after this.
Kochia sucks.
Big time. And hate it. Really gets in the way. Awful.
But not anymore. Get a head start on tough-to-kill weeds like kochia this fall with Volterra EZ and Fierce EZ Soil Active Herbicide. Apply after harvest before freeze-up for up to 8 weeks of extended control in pulses, soybeans, and wheat next spring. Volterra EZ, Fierce EZ for kochia. Visit newfarm.ca/kochia.
Hi, I'm Bernard Tobin, host of the Soybean School on RealAgriculture.com. Throughout the year, on the Soybean School, we'll bring you timely agronomic video content from planting to harvest, from the latest agronomic research to the latest in production technology. Check out our massive video library on YouTube, RealAgriculture.com, or download the audio podcast versions wherever you get your podcasts. The Soybean School is brought to you by Pride Seeds, BASF, and Syngenta Canada.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on this Friday. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and this segment is brought to you by Super U. Want true nitrogen protection? Skip imitator products for an agronomically effective solution like Super U, premium fertilizer from Koch Agronomic Services. Super U protects against all 3 forms of loss and is proven to boost yield potential. See how others stack up at defendyourn.ca. I absolutely love the Super U. Okay. Sean and I really need to get out more, maybe. All right, let's, last segment of the day, I've got Andrew Campbell, I've got Kelvin Heppner. Let's stick with this idea of international relationships, diplomacy, trade, all these sorts of good things. We've got some movement on the BRICS countries, and that Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates have been invited to become part of this group. Kelvin, is this an anti-West, not anti-West group?
It's sure looking like it's moving in that direction. So yeah, the BRICS group, it's something that I remember learning about in maybe even high school social studies class. I'm not sure. Brazil, it used to just be the BRIC group. It was Brazil, Russia, India, and China, all the world's up-and-coming countries at the time. And now South Africa is part of it, making it the BRICS. But now, yeah, this week they had a summit and they've invited 6 other countries. And you mentioned 2 of them there, Lyndsey, but I think the most controversial one here is that Iran has been invited to join this group. And Russian President Vladimir Putin, of course, he can't leave the country right now. There's an arrest warrant for him, so he wasn't at the meeting, but he sent a video message welcoming these 6 other countries or encouraging them to. It sounds like they could join. The invitation has been extended to these 6 countries: Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Iran, Egypt, Ethiopia, and Argentina. I think you could say it's an anti-West group. I don't know what kind of power or influence this group will have. They don't have a trading bloc. There's no trade agreement. There's no currency. There's no other centralized forms, organizations, institutions that they're forming from what I've heard, but they are holding these meetings and they held this summit this week. So like-minded countries in some ways getting together. And I think the thing that would align some of these countries would be that they are more of an anti-West type point of view on the world. So I don't know how meaningful this is, but it is part of this trend. We've heard some people like Jacob Shapiro, geopolitics specialists, talk about the world becoming more multipolar, having more polar, like not just the U.S. East-West or U.S.-Russia like it was in the Cold War, having more polar areas, that kind of thing. So multipolarization, and this is maybe a move in that direction.
So China's President Xi Jinping calls it historic to unite and cooperate with developing countries. Andrew, this is okay. So the list, as we said, these 6 this is Iran, Egypt, Ethiopia, Argentina, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia. How, from a Canadian perspective, do we feel a little on an island here? Like, hey, this might not work so well for us?
I don't necessarily think it's, we're on an island, because as Kelvin mentioned before, we're not really sure what the group does. There's no, trading block. There's none of that. I think if there was, formalizing more, well, one of the things they talk about that's come up, I think, since BRIC was first, kind of conceived, is the idea of some currency. I think you get into that territory, maybe it becomes a little bit problematic, because the reality is that by the time you add these 6 countries, it now represents almost 50% of the world's population and 1/3 of the global economy, which is no small group. And, the report in the Globe and Mail this morning was that, more than 20 countries have applied beyond the 6. 20 more countries have applied for membership, to this group. So I think there is this move, at least, to say, okay, let's align ourselves maybe, some way to see what happens. And we as Canada, at least we still have, the typical Western ally. So I don't think we're necessarily out on an island. I think if it evolves beyond, just a group that talks and shares and all that kind of stuff, we might have more of a challenge, since, as we talked about in the last segment, we need markets like this to be shipping products into.
Well, and so I have to wonder, if we're not entirely sure what the benefits will be, but we've got lots of countries that want memberships, there's something there. But maybe
There's
it is
definitely something
right. One of those tipping point type things where it's like, maybe not. And then you add a couple names, add a couple more, and it's like, oh, we don't want to be left out of this. There must be something there. So I guess we'll have to see what actually materializes out of it. So we'll keep tabs on it. So let's switch gears a little. Let's focus here back at home. Stats Canada came out with some pretty cool data today. I'll give them that. There's lots to unpack here. Kelvin, we got some demographic data about the farming population in Canada. There's a few not surprising things in there, but there's also some really kind of cool data points that have come out. What's maybe the neatest thing to you that you saw in this report?
Oh, that's a good question. There's a lot of information here. So Stats Canada has taken the 2021 census data and actually broken it down in terms of socioeconomic profile of Canada's farm population, linking farmers in terms of languages that we speak, or whether we report a religious affiliation, and where we live in a rural area or an urban area, and all types of socioeconomic type of information here. So yeah, it was kind of neat to go through. I'm not sure there were many surprises in this StatsCan report today, but it puts some numbers and shows some interesting trends here, such as more farmers, a greater percentage of the farm population is living in what StatsCan deems urban areas of the country. So if you go back a couple decades, 7.5% of Canada's farmers resided in urban areas. In 2021, that number was nearly a quarter. So 24.5% in 2021 lived in urban areas, up from 16% in 2016, just 5 years previous. So that's something that I think a lot of us can relate to. And part of this is because cities are growing, and what's deemed to be an urban area is taking up more area all the time. But that's an interesting trend. Religious affiliation, farm population continues to have a higher reported religious affiliation. 65% of average Canadians report a religious affiliation. 73% of the farm population reported this on their census in 2021. So yeah, a lot of just nuggets here that stand out. Diversification of income sources. Lots of different things here. I'll let you guys, Lyndsey and Andrew, share your thoughts.
Well, I'm going to ask Andrew. So here's the one that's perhaps not surprising. the farm population has a higher percentage of men and older people. So, and I almost want to laugh, but not really, because of course some stereotypes are earned. And this one perhaps is one of them, Andrew, that, you know, a lot of farmers are male and quite a bit older than the average Canadian. So what do you think, Andrew? Was this at all surprising, or what was the most surprising to you in some of this data?
Yeah, certainly, you know, as you both have said, you know, there's not a whole lot of surprising things. You know, being a bit of a numbers guy, like I like just seeing like, oh yes, what I thought does appear to be actually true. And you mentioned this, you know, older population. I think what it does is it kind of strikes this next question is like the average age of farmers can't go up forever. You know, eventually, I think, you know, that we're going to see a shift. I think there's got to be some kind of a generational shift of who at least owns these farms, and then what type of people are going to take those over. And, you know, one of the ones that, you know, I've been thinking about a lot, just, you know, through other projects and through other articles is, you know, even the immigrant farm population. So in 2021, immigrants made up, you know, less than 7% of Canada's total farm population, you know, which is pretty steady to what it's been over the last, you know, 20 years. You know, what role can immigrants play, I think, in this generational change when we think about, you know, who's working on farms today, who's managing farms today, you know, who might come from, you know, some places that are stricken with, you know, who knows what kind of disaster. You know, Ukraine comes to, you know, as an obvious mind, you know, come and work in agriculture. So, you know, when I look at these numbers, you know, yeah, certainly nothing is surprising, but I think it's then interesting to say, okay, how do these numbers evolve going forward?
Mm-hmm. And
I think we can see some areas where that will happen here. We see the average 27% of Canada's total population is from what StatsCan calls racialized groups. So Asian, Chinese, Black, Latin American would be examples. And in terms of Canadian agriculture, the farm population has 3.7%. So certainly a large gap there, not just stating it as facts, but that's somewhere that number is likely going to trend higher given Canada's population.
Mm-hmm. There are some really fascinating things. So if you want to check it out, head on over to StatsCan. We'll have a story on RealAgriculture.com as well, highlighting some of these really cool stats. And yeah, maybe not surprising, but definitely also good to sort of have something to compare to, look at those year-over-year changes. I also found it slightly interesting. The women in agriculture also, so it's not just the men, also are older than average. So 41% of the women in agriculture are over 55. The general population, only 33% are in that age category. So there you go. All those farm couples out there. Yeah. All right. But it does, I mean, it does put into stark, you know, focus here that in the next 10 years, there is a lot of changing going to happen, has to happen, sort of at the ownership level of these farms. So we'll see how that's reflected in the numbers, of course, going forward. All right. We're just about out of time. So Andrew, what's going to keep you busy this weekend?
Busy is probably a strong word for what the weekend has in mind. Is we've got kind of our last big vacation, which is where we take the trailer to my brother's, who lives 6 minutes away from me, and we camp there for the weekend. So it's our family camping weekend is this weekend, which the timing appears to have worked because it is so wet I can't do anything anyway. So I might as well hide in his pool. That seems like a good solution.
Well, and the robots do the milking, so you're good.
That's what I kind of figure. I'll leave. And I think the phone should call sometime over the next 3 days if it has a problem. No, not quite. It is one of those where it is quite convenient in that I can slip home, do my chores, go back. So we'll have a fun weekend, but busy is not the right word.
Okay. Anti-busy. All right, Kelvin, I know that when you camp and haul the camper, it's far more than 6 minutes away, but perhaps you need a neighbor like Andrew's brother, that you could just go one road over and go camp there.
We are Andrew's brother. We have friends come and camp on our yard so that we can do chores in the morning and still join them for breakfast.
I love it.
So
see, adapt, innovate, overcome, everybody.
Exactly.
I love it.
You better hit the road there, Andrew.
Yeah, no kidding. Kelvin, so what will keep you busy over the weekend? Because it doesn't sound like harvest is going to happen.
No, we likely won't be harvesting, but actually related to Monday's show right here on RealAg Radio, we're going to be taping the show live at the Winnipeg Goldeyes versus Kansas City Monarchs game tomorrow evening in Winnipeg at Shaw Park as part of the BASF In Vigor series. So looking forward to getting together with a bunch of farmers and people in the ag industry at the Goldeyes game tomorrow and recording that show, putting it together for Monday.
Yeah, which means I don't have to host Monday. But also means I bet you there's tickets. So get on over to the Goldeyes game tomorrow night. It's a great stadium, a lot of fun. All right, that does it for us, though. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on the show today. Have a wonderful weekend. I will be back Tuesday, but Kelvin will be here Monday. Cheers, everybody.